My name is Audrey Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old. Never did I imagine I'd be standing in the grand lobby of the flagship Mitchell Grand Hotel, the crown jewel of my grandmother's $50 million empire, watching security guards approach to escort me out. From the mezzanine level, my stepfather, Richard Coleman, smirked down at me, triumph gleaming in his cold eyes. My grandmother, Elizabeth Lizzie Mitchell, had built this empire from nothing and left it all to me in her will. Yet here I was, being treated like an intruder in my own legacy. But what none of them knew was that Grandma Lizzie had one last ace up her sleeve. Where are you watching from today? I'd love to hear in the comments. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal and sweet revenge, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling family. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Some of my earliest memories are of trailing behind my grandmother through the kitchens of the Mitchell Grand. I was barely tall enough to see over the countertops, but Grandma Lizzie would lift me up to watch the pastry chefs create the hotel's famous chocolate soufflé. One day, Audrey, she'd tell me with a wink, "You'll be the one giving the orders around here." The Mitchell Hotel empire wasn't always an empire. Grandma started with a single rundown motel in downtown Chicago that she purchased with her life savings in 1975. While other women her age were being housewives, my grandmother was scrubbing toilets, changing sheets, and slowly transforming that dingy motel into a boutique experience. By the time I was born, she had 3 hotels. By the time I graduated high school, there were 7 luxury properties across major U.S. cities, collectively worth over $50 million. The hotel business is in our blood, Grandma would say. She made sure I understood every aspect of it. During summer breaks, I'd work alongside the housekeeping staff, learning the importance of perfect hospital corners and spotless bathrooms. During winter holidays, I'd shadow the concierge, watching how they handled even the most outlandish guest requests with grace and efficiency. No job was beneath me, and no detail was too small to master. My father, Grandma's only son, had been her right-hand man until his death in a car accident when I was 15. After that, Mom sort of checked out from the family business. Rachel Mitchell had never been particularly interested in hotels. She'd been a successful interior designer when she met my father, and his death seemed to sever whatever connection she'd felt to the Mitchell legacy. I, on the other hand, threw myself even deeper into learning the business. It gave me purpose during those dark days of grief. Grandma Lizzie became not just my grandmother but my mentor, my guide, my fiercest champion. When it was time for college, there was no question about my path. I double majored in hospitality management and business at Cornell, with summers spent interning at each of our properties. The trouble started during my senior year. Mom, who'd spent the years since Dad's death moving between charity committees and spa retreats, suddenly called me with excitement in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. "I've met someone, Audrey," she gushed. "His name is Richard Coleman, and he's absolutely wonderful." Richard was a real estate developer with his own moderately successful company. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, and unfailingly charming. At first, I was happy for Mom. After nearly a decade of watching her drift through life, it was refreshing to see her enthusiastic about something or someone. The courtship was brief. Within 3 months, Mom and Richard were engaged. Within 5, they were married in an intimate ceremony at the rooftop garden of our New York hotel. I flew in for a weekend, met Richard for all of maybe 6 hours before the wedding, and then had to rush back for finals. I remember Grandma Lizzie sitting stiffly during the reception, her eyes never leaving Richard as he worked the room, charming the handful of guests. Later that night, I found her on the terrace, looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. "What do you think of him?" I asked, joining her at the railing. She took a long time to answer. "I think," she said finally, "that your mother deserves happiness." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement. Over the next few months, as I prepared for graduation, I noticed Richard appearing more frequently in conversations about the business. Mom would casually mention that Richard thinks the Chicago property could benefit from a renovation, or Richard knows someone who's interested in partnering on a new location. Meanwhile, Grandma Lizzie's health began to deteriorate. At 78, her fierce energy was finally flagging. She was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, and though she fought to maintain her iron grip on the company, more and more responsibilities fell to her executive team. During what would turn out to be my last visit with her, just weeks before my graduation, Grandma called me to her private suite at the flagship hotel. She seemed smaller somehow, fragile in a way I'd never associated with my indomitable grandmother. "Audrey," she said, taking my hand in her papery one, "I've made some changes to my will." I tried to protest. I didn't want to talk about her will, didn't want to acknowledge that she was slipping away, but she silenced me with a look I knew well. "The company will pass directly to you," she said firmly. "Not to your mother, not to the board, to you." "But Grandma, I'm not ready." "You are more ready than you know," she interrupted. "I've made sure of it, and the company needs someone who loves it the way we do." The way she emphasized we told me everything I needed to know about her opinion of my mother's new husband. She died 3 months later, just weeks after I graduated. The Mitchell Hotel empire had lost its queen, and I was about to discover just how treacherous succession could be. The reading of the will took place in the wood-paneled office of Walter Simmons, the family attorney who had worked with Grandma Lizzie for over 30 years. The atmosphere was somber as Mom, Richard, myself, and a few key executives gathered to hear Grandma's final wishes. Walter adjusted his glasses and began reading in his measured voice. I barely heard the preliminaries, my mind still struggling to accept that Grandma was truly gone. It wasn't until Walter cleared his throat and emphasized certain words that I snapped back to attention. The entirety of my shares and controlling interest in Mitchell Hotels International I leave to my granddaughter, Audrey Elizabeth Mitchell, to be transferred immediately upon my death. A heavy silence fell across the room. I felt Mom stiffen beside me. On her other side, Richard's face remained impassive, but I caught the slight tightening of his jaw. Walter continued, explaining that Mom would receive a generous allowance and lifetime access to any Mitchell property, but no controlling stake in the business. The company's leadership would pass directly to me. "This is absurd," Richard finally spoke, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. "Rachel is her daughter. Audrey has barely graduated college." Walter simply adjusted his glasses again. "Mrs. Mitchell was very clear about her wishes, Mr. Coleman. The documents are legally binding and have been reviewed by multiple attorneys." That night, Richard insisted on hosting a small dinner at their penthouse apartment. "To celebrate Lizzie's life and Audrey's new position," he said, raising a glass. His smile didn't reach his eyes, but I was too overwhelmed to dwell on it. "You know I'm here to help you however I can, Audrey," he said later, as we moved to the living room for coffee. "This is a tremendous responsibility for someone so young." Mom squeezed my hand. "We both are, honey. I know how much the hotels meant to your grandmother, but don't feel you have to shoulder this alone." My first week as CEO was a blur of meetings, paperwork, and well wishes from staff who had known me since childhood. I was determined to honor Grandma's legacy, to prove worthy of her trust. But I was also terrified of making a mistake that would tarnish everything she had built. It was during my second week that Richard appeared at my office door, uninvited. "I've been thinking, Audrey," he said, settling into a chair across from my Grandma's desk. "You're trying to run a $50 million company while also grieving your grandmother. That's too much for anyone." "I'm managing," I said, though, truthfully, I was working 16-hour days and sleeping poorly. "Of course you are," Richard smiled. "But I have a proposal. Let me help you manage things, just temporarily. 6 months, say. I have decades of business experience. Think of me as a mentor. Until you find your footing." I hesitated. "I don't know, Richard. Grandma wanted me to run things." "And you will be," he assured me. "I'm just offering guidance. Your grandmother loved these hotels, but she was old-fashioned in many ways. Some fresh perspective could be valuable." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Mom. Audrey, Richard mentioned his idea to help you, she said immediately. I think it's wonderful. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Mom, I'm not sure. Please, Audrey. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm worried about you. You look exhausted. And it would mean so much to me if you and Richard could work together. We're family. That word, family, hit me hard. Since Dad died and Grandma Lizzie became my primary connection to the company, Mom and I had drifted apart. Maybe this could bridge that gap. Maybe Richard wasn't so bad. Fine, I relented. But just as an advisor. For 6 months. Richard wasted no time. By the end of the week, he had an office next to mine and insisted on co-signing authority to help streamline decisions. He wanted access to all financial records to get a complete picture of operations. He began attending every meeting, often speaking before I could. 2 weeks in, the head of operations, Samantha Hayes, who had been with Grandma for 20 years, stopped by my office and closed the door. Audrey, I don't want to overstep, she said carefully, but I'm concerned about how quickly Mr. Coleman is inserting himself into operations. He's just helping temporarily, I explained, though a knot was forming in my stomach. Of course, she nodded. Just be careful. Your grandmother built something special here. The next day, CFO Benjamin Wong expressed similar concerns. The financial inquiries Mr. Coleman is making go well beyond familiarizing himself with operations, he said. He's requesting historical data on property values, loan terms, intellectual property valuations. My unease grew, but I told myself they were just being protective of the old regime. Change was always difficult. Then I caught Richard meeting with potential investors in the hotel bar. Investors I hadn't been told about. What's going on here? I asked, approaching the table. Richard looked up with practiced ease. Audrey, perfect timing. These gentlemen are interested in possibly expanding our brand internationally. I was just giving them some background. Later, in my office, I confronted him. You should have told me about that meeting. I didn't want to bother you with preliminaries, he shrugged. You're stretched so thin already. That's not your call to make, Richard. I'm the CEO. His expression shifted, hardening briefly before resettling into concern. Audrey, you're being paranoid. I'm trying to help you. If you fight me on every little thing, we can't function as a team. When I brought this up with Mom over dinner, she frowned. Richard says you've been shutting him out, Audrey. He's hurt. He's just trying to protect our family interests. Our family interests? He married into this family 5 minutes ago. That's unfair, Mom snapped. Richard has been more present for me than you have been since your father died. All you care about is the business, just like your grandmother. The accusation stung, especially because there was some truth to it. I had buried myself in the hotels after Dad died, just as Grandma had buried herself in building them after Grandpa died decades earlier. I left that night with a growing sense that Richard was driving a wedge between Mom and me. But I couldn't prove anything was actually wrong. Not yet. For 3 months, I watched as Richard systematically undermined my authority. It started subtly questions raised about my decisions in meetings, suggestions that certain matters be tabled for further review. Soon he was bypassing me entirely, issuing directives to department heads, and bringing in consultants without my approval. The watershed moment came during a quarterly board meeting. Richard arrived with a slick presentation entitled Vision 2025, Modernizing the Mitchell Legacy. As we all know, he began, not even glancing in my direction, the hospitality industry is evolving rapidly. While the Mitchell brand has a storied history, we need to position ourselves for the future. I sat stunned as he outlined a radical departure from Grandma Lizzie's philosophy. Gone was the emphasis on personalized service and unique character for each property. Instead, Richard proposed standardization across all hotels, aggressive expansion through franchising, and cost-cutting measures that would effectively transform our boutique luxury experience into a glorified chain. This isn't what we stand for, I finally interrupted. The Mitchell brand is about creating unique experiences, not cookie-cutter efficiency. Richard smiled patiently, as if indulging a child. Audrey, I understand your sentiment. But sentiment doesn't drive shareholder value. These changes could double our profitability within 3 years. Several board members, people I'd known my entire life, nodded appreciatively. I realized with growing horror that Richard had been working them behind the scenes. Within weeks, Richard began replacing key personnel with his own associates. The first casualty was Samantha Hayes, who was offered an early retirement package. When she refused, she was terminated for organizational restructuring. You can't do this, I confronted Richard after discovering Samantha had been escorted from the building. She's been with us for 20 years. The board approved the restructuring plan, Audrey, he said calmly, including your mother, who holds a significant number of shares despite not having operational control. This isn't personal, it's business. As more loyal employees were replaced with Richard's people, I began digging into the financial reports. The numbers didn't add up. Expenditures were being categorized strangely. Large consulting fees were appearing for firms I'd never heard of, and certain revenue streams seemed to be underreported. I printed out the concerning documents and went straight to my mother's apartment. Richard was out of town, supposedly touring our West Coast properties. Mom, I need you to look at these, I said, spreading the papers on her dining table. She barely glanced at them. Audrey, I don't understand all this financial jargon. That's why we have Richard. That's my point. Richard is manipulating the company finances. He's funneling money to shell companies, probably his own. He's destroying everything Grandma built. Mom's face hardened. You never gave him a chance from the beginning. Just like your grandmother, always suspecting everyone's motives. Because sometimes people have ulterior motives. I was shouting now. He married you right before Grandma died. Don't you think that's suspicious timing? How dare you? Mom's voice went deadly quiet. You think the only reason someone would want me is for your precious hotels? That's not what Audrey, I have something to tell you, she interrupted. Richard and I are expecting a baby. The news hit me like a physical blow. Mom was 49. It was possible, but barely. I know it's a surprise, she continued, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. It is for us too, but we're thrilled. Richard wants a family of his own, with me. The emphasis wasn't subtle. So you see, she pressed on, all this suspicion is not only hurtful to me, but stressful during my pregnancy. Richard is going to be a wonderful father, and he's working hard to ensure the Mitchell legacy continues for all of us, including your future brother or sister. I left in a daze, my financial evidence forgotten on her table. A sibling. At 28, I was going to have a baby sibling. And Richard would have a blood tie to the Mitchell family, strengthening his position. The next blow came a week later. I was called into a meeting with Richard and a lawyer I'd never met, Heather Wilson, apparently our new legal counsel. Audrey, thank you for coming, Richard began, as if this were his office, not mine. There's a small matter we need to clarify. Do you remember signing the family trust reorganization papers last month? I vaguely recalled signing several documents Richard had presented during a particularly hectic day. He had assured me they were routine updates to comply with new regulations. This document, Heather slid a paper across the desk, grants Mr. Coleman significant oversight authority as family trustee, given the upcoming addition to the Mitchell family and the need to ensure continuity of management across generations. My blood ran cold as I read the document. In essence, I had signed away much of my direct control, giving Richard authority to protect the interests of all beneficiaries, present and future. This can't be legal, I stammered. I want to speak with Walter. Mr. Simmons has retired, Heather informed me coolly. My firm handles all Mitchell legal matters now. I didn't approve that change. The board did, Richard said. Given Walter's age and health concerns, it seemed prudent. I left the meeting in a state of shock, feeling the walls closing in. That night, I broke down in my apartment, truly alone for the first time since Grandma's death. Richard had outplayed me at every turn. I had lost control of my inheritance. was being portrayed as an inexperienced, emotional young woman who couldn't handle the responsibility. And now even my mother was being used against me. As I sat surrounded by takeout containers and crumpled tissues, my phone rang. It was Jessica Parker, my college roommate and friend, who had recently joined a major law firm as a junior associate. "Audrey? I just heard about the Mitchell Hotel's leadership shakeup from the business news alerts. What's happening? Are you okay?" Through tears, I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Audrey," she finally said, "I'm not a corporate lawyer, but what you're describing sounds like a coordinated hostile takeover, and possibly fraud. You need real legal help, not just a sympathetic ear." "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "Richard has replaced everyone loyal to Grandma or me." "Start with me," Jessica said firmly. "You can stay at my place tonight if you want. Tomorrow, we begin fighting back." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't completely alone after all. 6 months to the day after Grandma Lizzie's death, I received a cryptic text message from Benjamin Wong, one of the few original executives still hanging on. "Emergency board meeting called. 2 p.m. You should be here." I hadn't been notified of any meeting. When I called Benjamin back, he answered in a whisper. "Richard didn't want you informed, but I thought you should know. They're making their final move." I arrived at the boardroom just as Richard was midway through a PowerPoint presentation titled Leadership Stabilization Initiative. The room fell silent as I pushed open the doors. "Audrey," Richard recovered smoothly. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I said, taking in the room. Several board members couldn't meet my eyes. Others' faces I didn't recognize regarded me with cool assessment. "What's going on here, Richard?" He sighed theatrically. "Since you're here, you might as well know. We're addressing some serious concerns about the company's direction under your leadership." For the next 30 minutes, I watched in mounting horror as Richard methodically laid out a case against me. Financial reports doctored to show declining profitability since I took over. Customer satisfaction scores somehow plummeting despite no significant operational changes. And most damning, emails apparently from my account showing erratic behavior and poor decision-making. "These are fabricated," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I never sent those emails. And those financial reports are manipulated." "Audrey, please," Richard said sadly. "This outburst only reinforces our concerns about your emotional stability. We understand this is difficult." One by one, Richard's recently installed executives testified to my supposed mismanagement. Maria Lopez, who had replaced Samantha as head of operations, detailed projects I had supposedly abandoned. James Wilson, who I now realized was likely related to our new attorney, Heather, presented IT records of concerning late-night access to sensitive files from my computer. By the time Richard called for a vote of no confidence, the outcome was predetermined. I watched as hands raised around the table, including my mother's, though she kept her eyes downcast. Given the board's decision, Richard announced with practiced regret, "I will be assuming the role of CEO effective immediately to stabilize operations and restore stakeholder confidence." Security was waiting outside the boardroom. 2 men I didn't recognize, not the familiar faces who had greeted me by name every morning. "Miss Mitchell," one said stiffly, "we've been instructed to escort you from the premises and collect your company credentials." The humiliation of being marched through the lobby, the same lobby where I had once toddled alongside my grandmother, was excruciating. Employees stopped to stare. A few looked away in embarrassment or sympathy. Most simply watched, unsure what to make of the spectacle. Outside, a small cluster of reporters had somehow gotten wind of the drama. Flashbulbs popped as I emerged, security still flanking me. "Miss Mitchell, is it true you've been voted out of your grandmother's company?" "Audrey, any comment on Richard Coleman taking over as CEO?" "Miss Mitchell, sources say your erratic leadership endangered the company. Your response?" I pushed past them without comment, tears threatening to spill. I had lost not only my inheritance and my connection to Grandma Lizzie, but now my reputation too. Back at my apartment, I found my key card no longer worked. A building manager I'd never met informed me that the penthouse belonged to Mitchell Hotel's corporate housing, and I was no longer authorized to access it. My personal belongings would be packed and delivered to an address of my choosing. I called the bank where I kept my personal accounts, only to discover they had been frozen pending resolution of certain financial questions. My credit cards were similarly suspended. In the span of hours, I had gone from CEO of a $50 million hotel empire to essentially homeless and penniless. Jessica took me in without hesitation, setting up her sofa bed in her modest one-bedroom apartment. "It's not the Mitchell Grand, but it's yours as long as you need it," she said, trying to lighten the mood. For 2 weeks, I barely functioned. I slept most of the day, mindlessly watched TV, and ignored Jessica's gentle suggestions that I begin fighting back. What was the point? Richard had won. He had the company, the board, the legal team, even my mother. I had nothing, not even access to my own bank accounts. "Audrey," Jessica said firmly one evening, setting a cup of tea in front of me. "This isn't you. The Audrey Mitchell I know doesn't give up, especially not on something her grandmother built." "You don't understand," I mumbled. "Richard has everything locked down. The board, the legal documents, the finances. Even if I could afford a lawyer, what would I fight for? It's over." "It's only over if you decide it is," she retorted. "Your grandmother built that empire from nothing. You think she never faced setbacks? You think she never had men try to take advantage of her? Do you really believe she wouldn't have planned for something like this?" I looked up, startled by the thought. Grandma Lizzie had always been 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Was it possible she had anticipated something like this happening? As if in answer to that very question, the next morning brought an unexpected delivery. A letter from an attorney I'd never heard of, Marcus Goldman. The office of Marcus Goldman was located in an aging building in downtown Chicago, far from the glossy skyscrapers where most corporate attorneys worked. The man himself matched his surroundings, elderly, slightly rumpled, but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Mitchell," he greeted me, rising from behind a desk piled with actual paper files. "I've been expecting you." "Your letter said you were my grandmother's attorney," I said, taking a seat. "But Walter Simmons handled all her legal affairs." Goldman's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "Walter handled her visible legal affairs. I handled matters she preferred to keep confidential." He withdrew a file from a drawer and adjusted his reading glasses. "Elizabeth Mitchell first retained me 30 years ago, long before your parents were even married. She believed in preparing for all contingencies. About 5 years ago, she became particularly interested in asset protection strategies. When Richard came into the picture, I realized aloud. Goldman neither confirmed nor denied, maintaining professional detachment. Your grandmother made certain arrangements and left specific instructions that I was to contact you 6 months after her death, not before, regardless of circumstances." "Why wait 6 months?" she said, and I quote, "If Audrey can hold her own for 6 months, she won't need this. If she can't, then the vultures will have shown themselves, and this will be her salvation." He peered at me over his glasses. "From what I've read in the business press, the vultures have indeed made themselves known." He handed me a key. "There's a safe deposit box at First National Bank on State Street, box 1142. This key and your identification will give you access." "What's in it?" I asked, turning the key over in my hand. "I don't know the specifics," Goldman admitted, "only that your grandmother called it her insurance policy." She was quite deliberate in keeping me uninformed about the contents. Plausible deniability, I believe, was her phrase. An hour later, Jessica and I sat in a private room at the bank, staring at the contents of box 1142 spread across the table. An old leather-bound diary, a USB drive, a set of yellowed documents in a folder labeled Original Incorporation, Mitchell Hospitality, 1975, and an envelope addressed simply, "For Audrey." With trembling hands, I opened the letter first. My dearest Audrey, asterisk. If you're reading this, then my suspicions were justified, and someone has attempted to take what rightfully belongs to you. I've watched you grow into a remarkable young woman, but the business world can be cruel, especially to young women who inherit rather than build their empires. Asterisk. Asterisk. I've lived long enough to recognize predators. They come with smiles and promises, offering help while plotting to take everything. Your grandfather taught me early. Always have a backup plan. This is yours. Asterisk. Asterisk. The diary contains my personal records of building this company, the true story, not the sanitized version for press releases. The USB drive holds recordings and documentation you may find illuminating, but the most valuable items are the original incorporation documents. Asterisk. Asterisk. You see, the Mitchell Hotel business has always operated as two entities: the public-facing corporation that owns the physical properties, and the Mitchell Trust, which holds the intellectual property. Our operational systems, our recipes, our design specifications, our customer databases, and most importantly, our reputation. Asterisk. Asterisk. They may have taken the buildings, Audrey, but without the Mitchell secrets, they're just empty shells. Asterisk. Asterisk. The terms of the trust are clear. Only a blood Mitchell, who has worked every position from housekeeper to manager, can access and control these assets. I've made sure you fulfill these requirements. No one else in the family does, not your mother, and certainly not any new additions to the family tree. Asterisk. Asterisk. It won't be easy to reclaim what's yours. But you're a Mitchell woman. Difficult is what we do best. Asterisk. Asterisk. With all my love and faith in you, asterisk. Grandma Lizzie. I looked up at Jessica, tears streaming down my face. She knew. Somehow she knew this might happen, and she protected me. We spent hours going through the safe deposit box contents. The diary revealed Grandma's shrewd business acumen and her sometimes ruthless tactics against those who underestimated her. The USB drive contained a bombshell, a recording of Richard, dating from before his marriage to my mother, discussing with an associate his plans to get control of the Mitchell portfolio by charming the widow. He explicitly mentioned targeting my mother as the weak link in the family. But the incorporation documents were the true game changer. As Grandma had explained, the Mitchell Hotel Corporation owned the physical buildings and standard operations, but the Mitchell Trust, a separate legal entity Grandma had established decades ago, owned the Mitchell experience, the signature scent pumped through the ventilation systems, the proprietary reservation software, the custom-designed furniture specifications, the secret recipes for the restaurant's famous dishes, the training programs, and the customer loyalty database. Without these elements, the Mitchell hotels would become generic luxury properties, losing the special touches that commanded premium pricing and generated fierce customer loyalty. And according to the trust documents, I was now the sole trustee with the power to revoke any licensing agreements between the trust and the corporation. Audrey, Jessica breathed, reading over my shoulder. Do you realize what this means? Richard might control the buildings, but you control the soul of the business. For the first time since the board meeting, I felt a smile spreading across my face. Grandma Lizzie's last ace, I whispered. She didn't just leave me an inheritance. She left me a weapon. The next morning, Jessica arranged a meeting with her boss, Rebecca Sullivan, one of the city's most formidable corporate attorneys. The elder lawyer listened intently as I explained the situation, occasionally making notes, but mostly studying my face with calculating eyes. Let me be clear, Miss Mitchell, she said when I finished. You're asking me to go up against Coleman and Associates, a well-connected real estate firm, in what will likely be a very public, very messy legal battle. Yes, I said simply. Rebecca's stern expression cracked into a smile. Good. I've been looking for an opportunity to cross swords with Richard Coleman for years. His tactics in the Westridge development case were questionable, But before we start filing motions, we need to understand exactly what vulnerabilities exist in his takeover. For the next several hours, Rebecca and her team pored over the documents from Grandma's safe deposit box, identifying potential legal angles. The Mitchell Trust was airtight. Grandma had updated it regularly, including just months before her death. Richard's methods, while ruthless, had been technically legal thanks to the documents I had unwittingly signed. Our strongest play isn't a direct legal challenge to his control of the corporation, Rebecca concluded. It's leveraging the trust to undermine the value of what he's stolen. But we'll need evidence of his mismanagement to build public and investor pressure. Jessica suggested reaching out to employees still loyal to the Mitchell family. I was hesitant. I didn't want to put anyone's job at risk, but we needed inside information. I started with a text to Benjamin Wong. Need to talk. Secure channel only. He responded hours later with an encrypted messaging app invitation. When we connected, his message was brief. Glad you're fighting back. Not alone. What do you need? Benjamin became our primary source, discreetly providing internal memos showing Richard's plans to rebrand the hotels under his own name, Coleman Luxury Properties. He was also preparing to sell off individual properties to various investor groups, dismantling the unified empire Grandma had built. Next, I contacted Samantha Hayes, who had been unceremoniously fired. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop, far from any Mitchell property. I've been waiting for your call, she said, embracing me. A lot of us have. Samantha revealed that she had maintained relationships with many long-term employees who were unhappy with the new management. She had also kept copies of operational documents from her tenure, all legally her work product that showed the proprietary systems Grandma had developed. Richard's team is trying to reverse engineer everything, she explained. But they're missing key elements. The hotels are already suffering. Guest complaints are up 30% in just the past month. With Samantha's help, we assembled a team of former Mitchell employees working from Jessica's apartment, which we jokingly dubbed Operation Phoenix Headquarters. The living room walls became covered with organizational charts, strategy maps, and timelines. I reached out to Grandma Lizzie's old industry contacts, people she had worked with for decades who owed their own success partly to her mentorship. Hotel suppliers, convention planners, travel agencies, and restaurant critics all provided valuable intelligence and expressed concerns about changes under Richard's leadership. The Mitchell's Sunday brunch at your Boston property was legendary, one influential food blogger told me during a call. Last weekend they served frozen pastries. Frozen! Your grandmother would have fired the entire kitchen staff on the spot. Small victories began to emerge. When Richard attempted to change the luxury bathroom amenity provider to a cheaper alternative, we discovered the contract had an ironclad exclusivity clause with the original vendor, a clause buried in the Mitchell Trust licensing agreement. The vendor, a family-owned business Grandma had supported from its inception, happily enforced the provision. During a late-night strategy session, as we were reviewing financial projections, my phone rang. The screen showed my mother's number. I hesitated, then answered on speaker. Audrey? Mom's voice sounded strained. Where are you staying? Your things were delivered to Jessica's apartment, but the doorman said you haven't been there in days. I'm fine, Mom, I said cautiously. What do you want? I'd like to see you. To talk. In person. I glanced at Jessica and Rebecca, who both shook their heads in warning. I don't think that's a good idea right now, I replied. Please, Audrey. Without Richard, just us. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for lunch the next day at a public restaurant neutral territory. Mom looked tired when she arrived, the designer clothes and perfect makeup not quite concealing the strain in her face. After awkward small talk, she got to the point. Richard says you're trying to sabotage the company, she said, that you can't accept losing control. Is that what you believe? I asked. She fidgeted with her napkin. I don't know what to believe anymore. Richard has been different since the takeover, more controlling, less attentive. And the baby? I couldn't help asking. Mom's eyes filled with tears. There is no baby, Audrey. There never was. The doctor confirmed it was just hormonal changes from perimenopause. She looked away, ashamed. Richard was so convincing. He had me believing we were going to have this whole new chapter together, but as soon as he got control of the company, the pregnancy miraculously became a misunderstanding. I wanted to say I told you so, but the broken look on her face stopped me. I'm sorry, Mom. No, I'm sorry, she whispered. I chose him over you, over what your grandmother built. I was so desperate not to be alone that I let him manipulate me, use me against my own daughter. I reached across the table and took her hand. It's not too late to fix this. She pulled away. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Audrey. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see him clearly now. She stood to leave. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Richard is dangerous when threatened. After she left, I sat processing this new development. Mom might be having second thoughts, but I couldn't trust her as an ally yet. Richard's hold on her was too strong, his manipulation too deep. That night, our team discovered Richard had scheduled a major announcement for the following week. Through Benjamin's sources, we learned he planned to announce the sale of the flagship Mitchell Grand to a Saudi investment group. This is it, Rebecca said grimly. If that sale goes through, the rest will follow like dominoes. We need to move now. Through our network of loyal employees, we monitored Richard's activities closely. The sale of the flagship hotel was moving quickly, with the Saudi investors arriving for a final property tour before signing the contracts. Richard had arranged an elaborate showcase of the hotel's amenities, culminating in a gala dinner featuring the Mitchell Grand's famous cuisine. He's trying to close the deal before anyone realizes he doesn't control the Mitchell experience, Samantha observed. Once they sign, it won't matter what's missing. Then we need to show them exactly what they're not getting, I said. Rebecca had formally registered me as trustee of the Mitchell Trust, giving me legal authority to act. Our first move was subtle but significant. We revoked the licensing agreement for the Mitchell signature scent, the custom fragrance that wafted through every property, a blend that Grandma had developed with a French perfumer decades ago. The effect was immediate but not immediately noticeable. Guests began commenting that something feels different about the hotel. The sense of welcome and luxury that hit visitors the moment they entered the lobby was gone, replaced by the generic smell of cleaning products. Next, we contacted the artisanal mattress company that created the custom Mitchell Dreamweaver beds, a key selling point featured prominently in all marketing materials. As the exclusive licensee of the design, I instructed them to halt all replacements and maintenance. Within days, the most eagle-eyed hotel review sites began noting the changes. Has the Mitchell Grand lost its magic? Wrote one influential travel blogger. My recent stay lacked the signature touches that once made this property exceptional. We moved on to the hotel restaurants, where executive chef Antonio Rossi, who had trained under Grandma herself, remained secretly loyal to the Mitchell tradition. On my authority, he removed all signature dishes from the menus, replacing them with standard luxury hotel fare. As complaints multiplied, Richard grew increasingly frantic, demanding explanations from his management team. Benjamin reported back that emergency meetings were being called almost daily, with Richard berating executives for the sudden quality issues. He knows something's happening, but he can't figure out what or who's behind it, Benjamin messaged. He's starting to suspect internal sabotage. The tension escalated when Richard's brother-in-law, James Wilson, began investigating potential disloyal elements within the staff. Several employees were terminated based on mere suspicion, creating a climate of fear. Samantha reported being followed to and from her apartment. "They're watching me," she said during a secure call. "Someone tried to access my laptop remotely too." We implemented stricter security protocols, using burner phones and rotating meeting locations. Jessica's apartment was likely being watched, so we established a series of safe houses, friends' homes, and short-term rentals to continue our operations. Meanwhile, I decided it was time to go public with my side of the story. With Rebecca's guidance and Jessica's help, I launched a blog called Honoring Hotel Heritage, ostensibly about boutique hotel preservation. Without directly mentioning the Mitchell properties, I wrote about the importance of maintaining the unique character and traditions that distinguish luxury hotels from mere expensive accommodations. True hospitality isn't found in marble lobbies or thread counts, I wrote in one post that quickly went viral in industry circles. It's in the details that make guests feel they've entered a different world, one crafted with intention and care, where every sense is engaged in creating memory. When these elements are compromised for profit, the soul of a hotel dies, even as its facade remains. Industry insiders immediately recognized the reference to the Mitchell situation. Journalists began reaching out for interviews, which I declined, letting speculation build. Richard responded predictably, issuing a press release about exciting updates and modernization coming to the Mitchell properties. But the damage was spreading. The luxury travel community is small and interconnected, and whispers that the Mitchell magic is gone began affecting bookings. The Saudi investors, meanwhile, were growing concerned. Their advance team had visited the property multiple times over the past year, experiencing the full Mitchell luxury. Now, just days before the final contract signing, that experience had noticeably degraded. Benjamin informed us that the investors had requested an emergency meeting with Richard, demanding explanations for the changes. Richard was scrambling to address their concerns, blaming supply chain issues and temporary staffing problems. He's offering them a substantial discount on the purchase price, Benjamin reported. They're hesitating but still interested. We needed something more dramatic to derail the sale completely. I decided it was time to make my presence felt directly. I'm going to confront Richard at the investor gala, I announced to our team. Rebecca frowned. That's extremely risky, Audrey. He could have you arrested for trespassing. Not if I have press credentials, I countered. Several journalists owe me favors for exclusive stories over the years. One of them will get me in. After much debate, we developed a plan. I would attend the gala undercover, gathering evidence of the hotel's declining standards. At the critical moment, when Richard was making his pitch to the investors, Rebecca would arrive with legal documentation establishing my control over the Mitchell Trust assets. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep. Pacing the floor of our latest safe house, I was struck by a memory of Grandma Lizzie showing me the secret passages built into the original Mitchell Grand Service corridors and staff elevators that allowed employees to move invisibly throughout the property. A great hotel is like theater, she had told me. The guests see only the performance, never the mechanics behind it. I smiled in the darkness. Richard might control the stage, but I knew all the trapdoors. The investor gala was in full swing when I slipped into the Mitchell Grand through a service entrance, using an employee access code that hadn't been changed since Grandma's day. Dressed in press attire, with a borrowed credential from the Hospitality Industry Journal hanging around my neck, I blended easily with the other media representatives covering the event. Richard had spared no expense, transforming the grand ballroom into a showcase of luxury. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, champagne flowed freely, and displays around the room highlighted planned enhancements to the property. The Saudi investors, distinguished by their traditional attire, were being personally escorted by Richard, who gestured expansively as he described his vision. I moved carefully through the crowd, noting with satisfaction the small but telling signs of decline. The canapés, once legendary creations of Chef Antonio, were now generic luxury foie gras and caviar, but without the signature Mitchell presentation. The service staff, many of them new faces, lacked the graceful choreography that had once defined Mitchell service. At precisely 9 p.m., Richard clinked a glass for attention. The crowd quieted as he took center stage, flanked by enormous screens displaying renderings of the reimagined Mitchell Grand. Distinguished guests, members of the press, valued investors, he began smoothly. Tonight marks the beginning of an exciting new chapter for this historic property. Under the stewardship of Coleman Luxury Group, The Mitchell Grand will transcend its quaint origins to become a truly global hospitality landmark. I felt my blood boil at the word quaint, as if Grandma's visionary approach to hospitality had been some charming but outdated notion. Our agreement with the Al-Farsi Investment Group, Richard continued, will inject significant capital into transforming this property while preserving its historical elements. On cue, the main doors opened, and Rebecca Sullivan strode in, flanked by her legal team, and to my surprise, my mother. Rebecca caught my eye across the room and gave a slight nod. It was time. I made my way to the front as Richard was midway through describing the planned renovations. Standing directly before him, I removed my press badge. "Audrey," he faltered slightly, quickly recovering. "What an unexpected surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth Mitchell's granddaughter has joined us." "I'm more than just her granddaughter, Richard," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly hushed room. "I'm the rightful CEO of Mitchell Hotels and the sole trustee of the Mitchell Trust." "Audrey, this is hardly the place for family disagreements," Richard said tightly, his smile strained. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately after the event." Rebecca stepped forward. "There's nothing to discuss privately, Mr. Coleman. We're here to serve you with legal notice that you are in violation of multiple licensing agreements between the Mitchell Hotel Corporation and the Mitchell Trust." She handed him a thick sheaf of documents, which he didn't even glance at before passing to an aide. "Whatever this is, it can be handled by our legal team tomorrow," he dismissed. "Actually, it can't," I said, raising my voice to address the room. "Members of the press, investors, distinguished guests, what you've been experiencing tonight is a pale imitation of the true Mitchell experience. The signature scent, the custom furnishings, the proprietary service protocols, the famous recipes, all of these belong not to the corporation Mr. Coleman has commandeered, but to the Mitchell Trust, of which I am the sole legal trustee." The Saudi investors exchanged concerned glances, their translator whispering rapidly. "These are baseless claims," Richard said sharply. "Security, please escort Miss Mitchell from the premises." As two security guards moved toward me, a voice rang out from the crowd. "Stop!" My mother pushed forward, standing beside me. "Richard, enough. I won't let you do this anymore." Richard's face darkened. "Rachel, you don't know what you're saying. Remember our agreement." "You mean your threats?" Mom's voice trembled but held firm. "I'm done being manipulated. Done watching you destroy what my family built." The head of the Saudi delegation stepped forward, his English precise and formal. "Mr. Coleman, what is the meaning of this? You assured us all intellectual property and operational systems were included in the sale." "They are, absolutely," Richard insisted. "This is merely a desperate ploy by the rightful owner of the Mitchell legacy," Rebecca interrupted, now addressing the investors directly. "My client controls every aspect of what makes a Mitchell hotel unique. Without her cooperation, you would be purchasing merely the physical structure, not the experience that commands premium pricing." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several journalists were recording the exchange, while others typed frantically on their phones. Richard's composure slipped further. "This is absurd. Rachel, control your daughter before she destroys everything." "She's not destroying anything, Richard," Mom replied. "She's protecting what her grandmother built. What I should have protected." The lead investor raised his hand for silence. "I believe we need clarification before proceeding. Mr. Coleman, you claimed full operational control of all Mitchell properties and systems." "And I have it," Richard insisted. "These allegations are unfounded." "Then perhaps you can explain," I interjected, "why the Mitchell signature scent is missing from the hotel, why the Dreamweaver mattresses are being phased out, why Chef Antonio's menu has been completely altered." The investor turned to his associates, conversing rapidly in Arabic. Then he addressed Richard again. "We will postpone any agreement until these matters are legally resolved." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You can't do that! We have a preliminary agreement, which is contingent on due diligence." the investor replied coolly. This situation requires further investigation. As the investors withdrew to a corner with their advisors, Richard lunged toward me. You little bitch, he hissed. You think you've won? I'll bury you in litigation so deep you'll never see the light of day. Benjamin Wong, who had been observing from the sidelines, stepped between us. That's enough, Richard. Richard shoved Benjamin hard, sending him stumbling backward. You! I knew you were working against me. You're fired. Effective immediately. The commotion drew everyone's attention, including the rolling cameras of the press. Richard, realizing he was being recorded, attempted to regain his composure, but it was too late. Mr. Coleman, called out a reporter, are you denying that you deliberately misled investors about your control of the Mitchell properties? I've misled no one, Richard snapped. This company is mine now. I've earned it. Dealing with Rachel's emotional neediness and playing daddy to her spoiled brat of a daughter. The Mitchell women were always too sentimental to run a business properly. A collective gasp went through the room. Even Richard seemed shocked by his own outburst. Into this charged silence came a new voice. I believe this might be relevant to the current situation. Marcus Goldman had arrived, carrying a tablet. This is a video deposition recorded by Elizabeth Mitchell 4 months before her death, specifically addressing any challenges to her testamentary wishes. He set up the tablet on a nearby table and pressed play. Grandma Lizzie's face appeared on the screen, still regal and sharp-eyed despite her evident frailty. I, Elizabeth Margaret Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, make this statement to address any future claims that I was incompetent or unduly influenced in my decision to leave control of Mitchell Hotels to my granddaughter, Audrey Elizabeth Mitchell. For the next 3 minutes, Grandma methodically dismantled every potential challenge to her will, specifically naming Richard Coleman as someone she considered an opportunist with designs on my life's work. She detailed her reasoning, her concerns, and her absolute confidence in my ability to carry forward her legacy. By the time the video ended, Richard stood alone, abandoned by even his closest allies. The Saudi delegation had departed entirely. Members of the press were furiously documenting everything. Richard made one last desperate lunge toward me, but hotel security, the same men who had once escorted me from the building, intercepted him. Miss Mitchell, said the security chief, should we remove Mr. Coleman from the premises? I looked at the man who had stolen my inheritance, manipulated my mother, and nearly destroyed my grandmother's legacy. He was still struggling against the guards, his face purple with rage, all pretense of sophistication gone. Yes, I said quietly. I believe Mr. Coleman's time at the Mitchell Grand has come to an end. As security led him away, still shouting threats and obscenities, I felt my mother's hand slip into mine. I'm so sorry, Audrey, she whispered. Can you ever forgive me? I squeezed her hand but didn't answer. Forgiveness would come, but not today. Today was about reclaiming what was mine. The aftermath of the investor gala unfolded with dizzying speed. By morning, business news headlines blared variations of Mitchell heiress reclaims hotel empire in dramatic showdown. Video of Richard's meltdown went viral in business circles, his threats and admissions damning him in both public opinion and legal proceedings. Rebecca Sullivan wasted no time filing motions to reverse Richard's corporate maneuvers. With the Mitchell Trust as leverage and Richard's public admissions as evidence, many of his actions were deemed fraudulent by the courts. The board members who had supported him quickly distanced themselves, claiming they had been misled about his intentions and methods. Criminal charges followed as forensic accountants uncovered Richard's systematic funneling of company funds into shell corporations he controlled. James Wilson, his brother-in-law, turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency, revealing a conspiracy that had begun months before Richard even met my mother. He researched wealthy widows and heiresses, James testified. Rachel Mitchell was selected because her emotional vulnerability after her husband's death made her an ideal target, and her strained relationship with her daughter and mother-in-law created exploitable family dynamics. The legal battles dragged on for months, But with Richard's credibility destroyed and mounting evidence against him, the outcomes were increasingly in my favor. By the time he was sentenced to 5 years for fraud and embezzlement, I had been formally reinstated as CEO of Mitchell Hotels International. My first act was to rehire Samantha Hayes as Chief Operating Officer and Benjamin Wong as CFO. Together, we rebuilt the executive team, bringing back many loyal employees who had been pushed out during Richard's tenure. The Mitchell family values aren't just marketing slogans, I announced at my first all-staff meeting. They're how we do business. Quality over cutting corners, people over profits, creating experiences, not just selling rooms. Repairing my relationship with my mother proved more challenging than rebuilding the company. The wounds of her betrayal ran deep, and though I understood how skillfully Richard had manipulated her, trust had been shattered. We started with weekly lunches, carefully avoiding discussion of Richard or the business, instead rediscovering each other as people. Mom entered therapy, working through her pattern of emotional dependency and the grief she had never properly processed after Dad's death. "I lost myself when your father died," she admitted during one particularly honest conversation. "I defined myself as his wife, then as his widow. I never developed my own identity the way your grandmother did, the way you have." "It's not too late," I told her. Mom nodded thoughtfully. "I'm thinking of reviving my interior design work. Not for the hotels, that's your domain, but I need something that's mine." Slowly, we rebuilt a relationship that was different from before. More equal, more honest, with clearer boundaries. Mom chose to step back from any operational role in the business, but remained a supportive presence in my life. 6 months after regaining control, I hosted a grand reopening celebration for the flagship Mitchell Grand. In the lobby, we unveiled a permanent memorial to Grandma Lizzie, a bronze statue depicting her as I remembered her best, with blueprints in one hand and her ever-present notebook in the other. The plaque read simply, "Elizabeth Lizzie Mitchell. She built more than hotels. She built a legacy." During the ceremony, I announced the establishment of the Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation for Women in Hospitality, providing mentorship and scholarships to young women entering the industry. It seemed the perfect way to honor a woman who had broken barriers throughout her career. Under my leadership, the Mitchell Hotels not only recovered, but flourished. I maintained Grandma's commitment to quality and personalized service while implementing my own vision for modernization. We expanded thoughtfully, adding properties in new markets without diluting the Mitchell experience. Industry recognition followed. Luxury Travel magazine named me Hotelier of the Year, citing my resilience in the face of corporate intrigue and commitment to preserving authentic luxury hospitality in an age of standardization. 1 year to the day after the confrontation with Richard, I found myself sitting alone in Grandma's old office, my office now. The room still held echoes of her presence. The antique desk where she drafted her first business plan, the wall of photographs documenting each hotel opening, the worn leather chair where she'd told me countless stories of her early struggles in a male-dominated industry. I opened my laptop and began typing a letter I knew she would never read. "Dear Grandma Lizzie, asterisk. It's been a year since I reclaimed what you built and entrusted to me. A year of rebuilding, repairing, and reimagining what the Mitchell name means in the 21st century. Asterisk. Asterisk. I wish I could tell you that I never doubted myself, that I was as fearless as you always were. The truth is, I nearly gave up. When everything seemed lost, when Richard had taken control, and even Mom had chosen his side, I almost accepted defeat. Asterisk. Asterisk. But then I remembered what you told me when I was 12, and failed to make the swim team. Mitchells don't quit when the water gets rough. We learn to navigate the current. Asterisk. Asterisk. Your foresight saved everything, Grandma. You knew someone might try to take advantage, and you created a safety net I didn't even know existed until I needed it most. The Mitchell Trust was brilliant, securing the soul of your creation separate from its physical form. Asterisk. Asterisk. I understand now that you weren't just teaching me about thread counts and wine pairings all those years. You were showing me how to stand my ground in a world that often tries to push women aside. How to fight without sacrificing grace. How to win by being smarter, not crueler than your opponents. Asterisk. Asterisk. The hotels are thriving. Bookings are at record highs, and we've won back the loyalty of guests who briefly strayed during Richard's tenure. The Saudi investors who nearly bought our flagship are now partners in our Dubai expansion on our terms, with the Mitchell experience intact. Asterisk. Asterisk. Mom and I are finding our way back to each other. It's different now. Better in some ways. We're more honest with each other, less willing to paper over difficult truths to maintain a facade of perfect family harmony. Asterisk. Asterisk. I still miss you every day. Still find myself reaching for the phone to call you when I face a challenging decision or achieve a new milestone. But in those moments, I also feel you with me in the protocols you established, in the values you instilled, in the strength you knew I had, even when I doubted it myself. Asterisk. Asterisk. Your legacy isn't just these beautiful buildings or even the Mitchell name. It's the understanding that true wealth isn't measured in property or profit margins, but in creating something meaningful that outlasts you. It's knowing that the most valuable inheritance you gave me wasn't financial control, but the courage and capability to wield it wisely. Asterisk. Asterisk. With eternal gratitude and love. Asterisk. Asterisk. Audrey. Asterisk. As I finished writing, I glanced up at Grandma's portrait on the wall. For a moment, I could almost see her wink at me, that familiar, mischievous sparkle in her eye that always appeared when her plans came together perfectly. The Mitchell legacy was secure, not just in the buildings that bore our name, but in the values that defined us: resilience, innovation, excellence, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. In the end, Richard had never understood what he was really trying to steal. The Mitchell Hotel empire wasn't just properties and profits. It was the culmination of one extraordinary woman's vision, protected by her love and foresight, and now carried forward by a granddaughter who had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest power comes not from what you own, but from who you are. Did you ever have someone leave you a surprising inheritance or gift that had an unexpected impact on your life? Or have you experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this tale of family drama and sweet revenge. Subscribe for more real-life stories and share with someone who appreciates a good comeback story. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from those who loved us enough to prepare us for battles they knew might come.